Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Our topic that we're going to be talking about is fitting IT into your budget for your organization. And this is, we try and talk to business owners just to help educate them on decisions about their IT. We want all of you guys to, make the right choices and decisions that fit your company's, needs. And just trying to bring up different points that you can use as talking points with your current staff or IT, or if you're looking to compare different IT companies. So yeah, fitting IT into your budget is that topic we're going to go over this time. And I have Gary back as our guest with INGRAIN IT. You want to do a little quick intro?
Sure. Yep, Gary from INGRAIN IT. We're out of southeastern Wisconsin. We're a managed service provider. So we really just like dealing with small to medium businesses and helping them become strategic, secure, and productive.
Yeah, sounds great. Well, on fitting IT into your budget, I'm trying to think of an IT, a business owner or office manager, someone that's, just trying to get into this and figure out, okay, I'm going to compare IT companies and, what do I need to spend? I think a lot of companies, aren't familiar with the industry. They just think every IT company is the same. And so let me look at just that bottom price, that they're saying that they're going to charge me. And if they say only need to come once a month or not, or whatever the situation is, it's just a little bit more involved. Not every IT company is the same, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And you got to be really paying attention to what's included in that value, part of the service.
Right. I mean, I think when it comes to pricing IT, we'll have to call it what it is. It's the pink elephant in the room. Nobody really wants to pay attention, right, to pricing IT because it's an enigma. It changes. Nobody understands it. When things are working great, it's awesome. And they feel like they're getting their money's worth and things aren't working great. They're wondering, why am I spending so much money to keep this stuff going when now that it's down and technology is ever evolving. So to know how to budget for IT is probably one of those things that if you got the right resources, you don't need this secret decoder ring to figure it out.
Right. And the IT companies that you're working with should be able to break it down in a non-technical way. It needs to make business sense. I think you know what I'm trying to say. Business right. Sense. You don't want just someone coming in that's technical and just spilling out all this technical wording and focus on the tech side. It has to make sense on the business side and the numbers and value and everything. So the person should be able to sit down with you and just trying to just chat, just have a conversation about what they do and what they don't do and your different needs.
Right. I mean, it comes down to this. When you're trying to find an IT provider and fit it in your budget, the IT provider, whoever's presenting it, should actually give you some type of ratio comparison to the experience. So if I pay X, what is the experience I'm going to get? Is it going to be an experience where I call you when I have problems, and then you come and bill me for those problems, right? And that world is considered break fix. Is it going to be a little bit more proactive where there's remote support? So you'll handle things in the background, right? In the bat cave. And then when I decide to throw up the bat signal, then you come on site and bill me? Or is it going to be more all encompassing? So that way I truly get an IT experience that's indicative of having an in-house IT staff, like I would if I was a larger company, right? So those are kind of the three buckets that most people look at. And you got to be careful with those buckets because each one has, right, strengths and weaknesses that helps you control your cost, but also can cause some dynamics that you need to consider for your business.
Yeah. And if one way to think about it too is what is the best option, that you want? If you imagine the best IT group that you're working for, what are they doing? And, take that, that's what you need or want. But then the price doesn't have to, equal the cost of a whole IT department or internal group necessarily.
Right.
But it should still function, the way that you need it without them gouging you, really. If there's a price that's way low too, find out why they're quoting you so low and why it's different than the others, or or whatnot.
Right. And look in terms of, right, we all know that time is the most valuable element we have. So are you paying for ensuring that your company is up and productive, or are you paying for expertise, or are you paying for a disruption, meaning that when I'm in break fix and I'm bringing that engineer on, I am paying him the highest hourly rate because I'm trying to control his time because he's billing me for a high rate. So in order to work in the break fix environment where the IT company, they're the ones who are actually in control, because the more they do hourly work, the more money you spend, the more money they make. So there's not a really good balance there as far as really understanding what you're trying to get for your dollar. You just know that if I get an hour's worth of work, it may be $160 an hour that I pay out. But the biggest challenge of that is you really don't have any idea of what you're not paying for. And that's where really good IT companies start to come in, because it's the little things, the attention to detail that matters, that's in the back end. Like I talked about Batman in the Batcave, you don't see. And if somebody's not paying attention to that detail, that's where your risk really starts to ramp up. So on one side of the equation, you're controlling your cost. I only want to budget for 4 hours a month or 8 hours a month. And if I take 8 times whatever the labor rate is, I know exactly what I can get every month. But on the flip of that, there's a lot of things that you're not paying for because you don't know. And when the provider decides to bring them to your attention, what does that do from a transactional side? It means you're paying more money. And the goal of a break fix environment is to actually upsell you more hours because they want more money. That's how they make their money. So that dynamic is not in the best interest of you as a consumer of the service.
Right. Yeah. And when you're saying, knowing what you're not getting, sometimes that's difficult to know. But like one example that I've seen is, I guess a relationship. So do you only see techs showing up, and every time you have a problem or whatever, it's always a tech? Or do you have engineers or consultants, that are meeting with you, or someone meeting with you and having, for example, like a QBR, quarterly business review of your technology, and sitting down with the business owners or decision makers and working together? The company's trying to accomplish this, make sure your technology is aligned with that, and hitting, your different security backups, just being together, as a group, looking for that partner. It's kind of, just one example that comes to mind.
Yep. Yeah, no, what you're trying to identify is, again, what are the components I need to make sure that my IT provider and my organization are aligned? So am I paying for something that gets both of us on the same page when it comes to ensuring my company and organization is up and optimized and my risk is mitigated, right? Because that's what it's about. Yeah. If you look at the 4 things, is how does IT help me increase my revenue, reduce my operational cost, improve or maintain high productivity for my employees, and ensure that I'm legally compliant? And of course, that's always encapsulated under how do we keep it all secure because of the landscape that's happening today. So anyone that's providing IT services and fitting a budget, you should know that those things are kind of accommodated. And yeah, there may be some breakouts where if you want advanced security, that's going to be an additional charge because you're asking for something that is above and beyond just the basic traditional IT arrangement, right? You want that added protection, and that added
compliance or disaster recovery, something like that. Yeah.
Right. And all those things equate back when we talk about productivity or uptime, right? If I'm paying for a business continuity solution, as an organization, it's actually incumbent upon me, meaning that as the buyer of the IT services, to really understand what the impact is in relationship to if I was out of business for a day, for 8 hours. If I took my average hourly rate for my employees times 8 hours, what would my loss of just operational cost be? Now, if you can actually figure out your revenue per day, right, of a loss, you combine those two things. One day lost operational cost and lost revenue cost can be significant. That also gives you the basis to know if I want to reduce that, right? In rough numbers, if it takes you $28,000, you find out, per employee, you could lose if you had this major impact for a day. If you just take 25% of that, $7,000, and allocate that as an annual expense of the employee, you're actually in much better shape trying to budget for your IT expenses than just trying to arbitrarily say, well, I think it's going to be like 4 hours or 8 hours for me to manage the environment. So I'm going to control my cost based on how much I'm willing to spend to an IT provider.
Right. Yeah. One thing I've seen recently is where someone's current IT provider would only come and provide support after hours. So then they're already down, that whole day possibly.
Right.
Or even, if it's late in the afternoon, the following day, until they can get there and after hours and work on it. And so, yeah, you got to put costs to all this for downtime.
Right. And a lot of the stuff comes down to, what are you willing to pay for? And then what is part of the arrangement you feel you're willing to give up, meaning that maybe you don't want to pay for documentation per se. Like for you, you just want the outcome, the problem solved, right? Well, that works great for you if you just look at that perspective. And it works really good for a break-fix IT company because they don't need to spend time on documentation, because every time the problem reoccurs, they'll just take whatever time it takes to get it done because, again, that's their revenue. But a more efficient IT company is going to look at it and say, okay, if we have a balanced approach, meaning there's mutual accountability to what I spend to what I get, and I want to try to reduce, right, maintain productivity and outcomes, then there should be an opportunity for me to pay for documentation. The IT provider wants to get the documentation done because it actually benefits both long-term from an efficiency standpoint, and those efficiency gains help reduce risk and increase productivity. And if you're not considering those things in your equation, you're going to control your costs just based on what you see, feel in immediate. And
right.
Most of IT, the maintenance, everything else, the documentation, that is all back-end high-value work that you as a consumer don't see until it's required, meaning that the documentation feel or the lack of, you don't feel the lack of documentation until you go into a critical response mode because your server is down and you find out your current IT provider is operating seat of the pants, meaning that they're just billing you by the hour as they figure things out. But a good IT provider who takes the initiative to document that process fully, when that event takes place, there's no consideration. We already know what we have to do. We know how to communicate, and we work on getting those things done. And what value is that to your organization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and think of a company too that doesn't document well. So they have, let's say, Billy, that's servicing, keeping all the knowledge in his head, not documenting, or just documenting in Notepad or on his laptop. What happens when he's sick, goes on vacation, quits, leaves, and someone else comes in, and then you're paying this other person that doesn't have that knowledge in their head extra time, double, triple, sometimes even 4 times the time to get the stuff done. It's bad for both sides.
Yep. Well, and I think you bring up another valuable point, Chris. Right. One of the reasons why you outsource IT is because you recognize that in-house, you probably don't have the technical expertise to understand it all. Right. However, even if you brought an in-house IT person in, or you work with, let's say, an individual who is an IT company, in IT's landscape today, there is so much specialization. I mean, I'm not a spring chicken. And when I started, you could be a generalist. You can know enough about everything IT to really get it done. but I'm sure you know, now you have security experts, you have Mac experts, you have all these different things that a true IT organization, they have individuals that specialize in certain aspects of the business, because that expertise means that they're the most efficient, and that attention to detail means things are getting done right, and done consistently.
Mm-hmm.
So when you go back to knowledge transfer, if you have an IT person or an individual that's doing your IT, and you talk about, you know, the bus phenomenon, if they get hit by a bus, right? We've already seen this too, where you don't got to worry about them getting hit by a bus. Even if they weren't, they forget documentation. We've taken over customers where the in-house incumbent IT provider did not know passwords for critical infrastructure because it wasn't required by them. So if they didn't use it, if they said it once and never had to touch it again, it was out of sight, out of mind. But a good IT provider, which is what you're trying to pay for, again, has that responsibility for documentation, and then can demonstrate it, prove it, and everything else. And now you know that's part of the fitting IT into your budget, because you can, in your brain, you can look at it and say, you know what, I can't necessarily see that right away, but I know that part of what I'm paying for with my IT experience is that documentation piece. And that's important to me. And I want to make sure that that's being done as part of whatever arrangement I have.
Right. Yeah. That sounds good. One thing that came in mind, it kind of goes a little bit off track a little bit, but on having the specialists is, you know, I would say techs by default are horrible at security. You know, they see a problem or something needs to be accomplished, and they're just going to go and do that. You know, it might still be best practice, but having a group that specializes in cybersecurity, they have a very different mindset, you know, of how they think about things. And when you need to have security or have things locked down appropriately, or security best practice, yeah, you got to have those specialists, because they're going to be doing it very different. You know, not that the tech was doing the tech side wrong, but yeah, from a security standpoint, it can be very different.
Yep. Well, and like we talked about before, if you're in break fix, what is the responsibility of the tech in a break fix environment? It's to get it done as fast as possible. And sometimes that means it's going to be the demise of other considerations like security. Because when a tech is on your site and you know that the clock is ticking and every minute is $1 out of your pocket, I've seen it where they're breathing down your neck. Like, you're trying to really make sure this tech is getting it done as fast as possible because you want to minimize your cost. In a good arrangement, you're not thinking about that. You want them to do it right? You want them to consider, essentially, look at the problem, expand it globally, and see if there's a larger consideration that's got to be accomplished in order to meet the organizational goals, not just meet these arbitrary time commitments to save money out of your pocket. Good agreements mean that they include things that allow the MSP, the managed service provider, to do things right, and what you feeling they're doing things right, without every time they do something, it's a transaction out of your wallet. There's a balance there.
Yeah. I think
the other component on that too really comes into any IT provider that really comes into this with knowing that it's a mutual responsibility, that there's balance there, also comes in with a legal agreement that states such. Right? Too many IT providers that we've seen don't have legal agreements that actually specify what the exclusions are, what they include, and everything else, leave it open, including things like cybersecurity insurance. Right? What do they have that helps protect you in case something they do goes wrong? Those are important considerations in fitting IT into your budget. Those are questions you want to ask the provider. Because if in a break fix arrangement and it's by the hour, you're not really signing an agreement besides you are willing to pay, right, this effort at this time at this cost. Yeah.
Agreement is definitely something that, you know, you need to pay attention to. Look for certain things like, exactly what you were saying. What's included, what's not. We have a IT company around us that says we're all inclusive. No problem. You need it done, we get it done. Then you look at their agreement and it says this section is included, but this area, you know, we're going to charge, we may or may not charge extra for, and it's just like this huge gray area. And I've talked to companies where, yes, they were charged for this extra work. And they said, but you told me this. Well, yeah, but the agreement says this.
Right, right. In IT, there's definitely a buyer beware, all right? The IT provider's job, especially when it's IT, is to make sure that, A, they're profitable. They want to be profitable as an IT provider because that is longevity, so they can support their customers in the best way possible. Each one of their models is different. So it's really not up to them to say to you, hey, how do you parse this out, right? Part of it is confusion, but that means you have to be more aware of what you're asking for. You need to create some scenarios based on your experiences that say, hey, if this were to happen, based on my experience, is that included? If you replace a workstation, which is the one that we see the most common, it's workstation replacements. Everything's included. But if we have to put a new workstation, well, then the labor for that new workstation isn't included. That's by the hour. What? Everything was included. Yeah, but that's a migration. That's an upgrade. That's right. They parse out the technical specifics of what that is. And that becomes a point of contention because when you're under agreement and you're like, hey, I thought this was included, they're going to go back to the legal terms and say, well, yeah, it's not. Here, read the print here. So be very clear on what you're actually paying for. And that may mean finding out what you're not paying for.
Yeah, yeah.
Asking that question specifically.
Yeah, that's I like what you said. It's, yeah, is this included? Or, you know, you charge me extra for this, and yeah, then that's when they say, well, let's look at the agreement now, you know, after we have you as a client. But yeah, good information. You have anything? I mean, I think we've covered this topic pretty well. Do you have any kind of last points or anything? Or
I mean, it really comes down to you as an IT or non-IT organization, I should say, really understand your business the best. You know what your cost structure is, what your revenue is, where your impact is from an organizational perspective. So when it comes to expenditures, you want something that actually helps align with that. Now, there's your perceived notion of what you paid before. That may be wrong based on today's constraints and cybersecurity challenges. And you always want to be open to say, what is IT really supposed to cost me? And how can I get the best IT experience for the budget I'm willing to spend? It's like when I was selling computers back in the 90s, we had an easy rule of thumb. And back then, computers were pretty expensive. It was you take whatever you could afford and you buy the most CPU, the most RAM, and the biggest hard drive you possibly can. And if you had to choose one of the three, well, then go with the hard drive, right? Because storage at that point was expensive. So get the most storage. Well, with the provider, take your budget, and I'm not saying to spend it all, but really try to maximize what you're willing to spend on an IT experience. And then you could always figure out the differences because there should be a way to value add those differences. Oh, the reason why this isn't included, this didn't exist. It's new to us. Therefore, you can do that as a project. And now you can cost justify that based on, again, increased revenue, decreased operational cost, or something else. So you get to make business decisions, not arbitrary, I'm trying to lock in my budget based on things I don't know, like how much time somebody's going to spend. Yeah,
well said. I think that's a good summary to go ahead and end our live stream. I really appreciate you joining us again, Gary.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and everybody stay safe. Take care.
All right, take care.